A few years ago I made a video about the stainless steel Kalita Wave and the problem that this particular model has. I mentioned that Kalita should really make a better version with a rock solid flow rate and a light and sturdy material. That hasn't really happened. Luckily, there's a bunch of hungry new coffee brands out there that are trying to rethink the flat bottom brewer. So today we're going to take a close look at these three models I have here in front of me. Today I want to compare them and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each of them. I have the April dripper made by Patrick Rolfe and his brand April. I have the simplified dripper made by a Japanese brand called Bathtub Coffee. And then finally I have the Timemore B75 made by the Chinese brand Timemore, which is of course more famous for their grinders and scales. Before going into this review, I should also say that there are many opinions out there about what a flat bottom brewer should be and what it should do. Some people see it as a more consistent alternative to a conical dripper because you have some restriction of the flow. The idea is that you don't have to pour as carefully. Back in the days, that was probably the most common argument in favor of flat bottom brewers. For me, what I mostly value in a flat bottom dripper is slightly different. For me, the most important thing is that it's a consistent brewer and that it has a rather fast flow rate. I think most drippers can give you good results if you're ready to tweak grind size and experiment with technique. But what I really have been looking for in my collection is something that's light, consistent, affordable and fast. With the Kalita Waves, I don't get something that ticks all of those boxes, so that's what I'm looking for here. I really like the steel Tsubame version, but that one is kind of expensive. The ceramic Kalita is also a good option, but it does require a lot of preheating. So those are my kind of thoughts and considerations going into this comparison here. The April dripper is a really interesting dripper since there's so much documentation about the history of it, how it's been developed and how the inventor wants you to brew with it. You can just go to April's YouTube channel and then there's plenty of information about the recommended brewing technique, which I should say is a quite unique brewing technique with only 2 pours and no bloom. But it's one that's been working well in my experience. There are actually 3 different versions of the April dripper. The first ones that came out were made of ceramic and glass. I haven't tried those 2. I always thought they were a bit too expensive for what I want. The ceramic one also comes with a cup and I don't really want to be forced to buy an extra cup. But the plastic one is more interesting. This is actually the version 1. I think there's also a newer upgraded version that's been released that uses a slightly different plastic material. This model here sits at around $40 US, and then depending on where you live, there's also shipping to factor in. It's still kind of expensive, but when you're buying a new niche product, then that's to be expected. Overall, the design is quite straightforward. You have these 3 big fins here protruding, and they're kind of designed to help keep the filter away from the drain hole. It's also a very lightweight dripper, weighing in at only 65 grams. If I have to complain a bit, then it has 3 small hairline cracks at the bottom. In daily use, it doesn't make any difference, but I'm a little bit worried that the bacteria or something like that could get stuck in there. I also think that's probably the reason that April has changed to a different kind of plastic in the newer versions that's released of this dripper. Next up, we have the simplified dripper from Bathtub Coffee. Again, it's a very unique and interesting design. The idea behind it is that you should use a 1 pour recipe. So as with the April dripper, this model also comes with a kind of a standard recipe. There's a video on YouTube from the company where they demonstrate how to use it, but I have to say personally I'm not a big fan of this kind of 1 pour technique. It's very easy, it's very simple, which I'm sure is nice for some people. But for me, and I think most viewers of this channel, we are already geeking out when it comes to coffee products, so we're probably spending a lot of time and effort getting a right grinder, playing with the composition of the water. So in that sense, it would be a little bit weird if we didn't try to maximize extraction and play with different techniques. So I think most people who are watching this probably want to brew in a different way from what the makers of this device recommend. Luckily, in my experience, it does work well with a wide range of techniques. Again, like the April dripper, this one is very lightweight, only weighing in around 50 grams. So that's going to be great for thermal stability. There's not really a lot of mass that can suck energy from the brew water. So in that sense, I think it's a really good design. Also, it has a kind of a unique design where the filter isn't really touching the sides of the dripper much. So it's just resting here at the top and here at the bottom. And that also means that the material is even less likely to steal energy from the brew itself. The material is a little bit different compared to most other drippers in my collection. It has a little bit of flex to it. It's supposed to be a material called Tritan, and I think actually this flex is a good thing. So if you drop it or if you squeeze it somehow in your luggage, it's probably less likely to break compared to most other types of drippers. Depending on where you are in the world, this one here is also sold for around $40. So yeah, it's kind of in the same range as April or some of these other more rare products. Overall, I will say it's a kind of unique design. Has this very big hole which ensures a quite fast flow rate, and then it has these small dots here lined around the edge, which also helps to lift up the filter and helps to avoid clogging. So in my experience, it has been quite consistent and fast brewer. Also, it has these ribs here at the bottom, which helps to lift it up from the carafe or cup that you're brewing into. And that also helps to ensure an even airflow. Overall, I will say it's a really interesting design. It doesn't really look like anything else available on the market. And during the last couple of months where I've been using it, it's been working quite well. Finally, we have the Timemore B75. This is the first dripper from Timemore that I try. They also have a conical version. It's called the Crystal Eye dripper. This dripper was released very recently, and I have to admit, when I saw it, I just knew that I had to try it right away because it has this unique design here at the bottom. You can instantly tell that this is going to be a very fast dripper. There's almost no resistance to the paper filter, but it just has these vertical ribs that will help to keep the filter lifted up so it doesn't really clog down in any particular arena. It also has these ribs here on the inside, which helps to lock the wave filter in place. So after you wetted your filter, then it's really difficult to unseat it. So I think it's a pretty clever design in that sense. Compared to the two other drippers, it's also made of a more heavy, more sturdy material. It weighs in around 120 grams, so it's around double the size of the two other brewers. On one hand, you can say it's good because it's more solid, but it's also going to steal a little bit more heat from the brew water compared to the two other drippers. Overall, I will still say for a dripper, it's pretty lightweight. Certainly compared to most ceramic or other materials, it's going to be lighter than that. So I don't think it's a massive issue. Timemore is a big brand with economy of scale, so this is going to be sold for a low price. Depending on where you are in the world, you can probably find it for somewhere around $15 to $30. The dripper actually comes with a few filters in that smaller 155 size, but in my experience it also works really well with big Kalita filters. They will protrude slightly, maybe half an inch above the edge of the dripper, but that's actually a good thing if you're going to be brewing a big batch with this device here. I would say the sweet spot dosing-wise is probably around 15 grams, but because the flow rate is so fast, and if you're using that slightly taller filter, you can get away with brewing up to 22-23 grams in one go. Now let's talk a little bit about my experience testing these three drippers side by side. First, I brewed 3 coffees at the same time with the same recipe to get some understanding about how they work. I used 15 grams and 250 grams of water split via 3 pours. The result was pretty clear. The Timemore B75 had the fastest flow rate and finished the brew in only 2 minutes and 5 seconds. The Simplify finished at 2 minutes and 15 seconds and the April dripper finished around 2:35. This result was also pretty consistent with what I've been experiencing just brewing day-to-day coffee at home. The TDS of all 3 were pretty close. It was a little bit higher with the April dripper and the Simplify the dripper compared to the Timemore, which is also something you would probably expect due to these two brewing a little bit slower. So April and Simplify came in at 1.28 TDS, while Timemore only came in at 1.23. I also tried to run a second test where I used the Gabby Drip Master B just to avoid any differences in pouring technique, and the results were almost the same. So this time I used a very fine grind size, 12 grams to 200 grams of water. Again, the B75 was simply faster. The B75 came in at 2 minutes and 9 seconds, whereas the April and Simplify both came in around 2:25 to 27. While preparing for this review, I also asked some of my followers over on Instagram if they had any particular questions they wanted me to look at in this video, so let's just go through a couple of them. So Scott asks about the Timemore B75. It looks great, but the real importance is, does this dripper really improve the taste? That's the real bottom line. Well, I think it's hard to say that any of these drippers just improves the taste of a given coffee. I would probably rank the order of importance to grinder and water being more important. So all these three drippers here can make great coffee, but so can the Kalita Wave. I will say that some drippers, they actually have some design flaws that makes it more likely to brew bad coffee because they're simply not consistent, which is the case with the stainless steel Kalita. So in that sense, these drippers here are better simply because they're more consistent. In general, I also got a lot of comments from people who wanted me to include the Oria in this lineup here. So the reason I didn't do it was because according to most people who have the Oria, you really need to use it with that negotiator tool where you can squeeze a special kind of paper filter into the bottom of it. And that actually makes it a very different kind of brewer compared to these ones here that all work well with the Kalita filter. According to what I've seen, that's not really the case with the Oria dripper. It's more trying to go into that whole no bypass brewing philosophy, whereas these brewers here are more what you would call regular flat bottom brewers that you can compare with the Kalita Wave. So that's the reason I haven't included the Oria. You Are What You Eat 309 asks where you can buy the drippers. Well, for April and Simplify, I think you can already find them in several of these niche coffee shops worldwide, whereas the Timemore B75 is still so new, it's not really available a lot of places outside of Asia. You can get it on AliExpress already, and it's quite affordable. I'll leave a link to some of the vendors on AliExpress, but if you have a little bit of patience, I'm sure it's going to be available in most of these places where you can already buy the Timemore grinders and the scales. Okay, time to wrap this one up. Overall, I really enjoyed using all three of these brewers here. April dripper, I will say, it's not really a Kalita Wave replacement for me. It's more an interesting tool to play with, especially if you want to experiment with that unique two-pour recipe that Patrick Rolfe has created. It does work really well with that technique, but it's also an interesting approach to puro or coffee because the technique is so consistent. Then it's more about dialing in the grind size. So in that sense, it's almost like brewing espresso where you just find the perfect grind size and then, yeah, the technique is consistent from brew to brew. I'm a little bit disappointed with the small hairline cracks since it is a quite expensive product, but hopefully they have fixed it with newer upgraded material. Simplify the dripper has really surprised me in a positive way. If you're not using that single pour recipe, but instead just use your regular flat bottom recipe, most likely it's going to produce a pretty good cup. It's quite consistent, fast brewer. And yeah, I could see it become a replacement for the Kalita Wave in daily use. And finally, the Timemore B75. It has a really fast flow rate. It's been quite consistent. I would probably say out of these three drippers here, this is the one I would use if I had a really tricky light roast natural Ethiopian that was prone to stalling. Then I would be pretty confident that this one here could handle it. So if all these drippers were all sold around the same price, I'm not 100% sure which one I would go for, since they all bring something unique to the table. But now that the Timemore B75 is going to be so much cheaper than the two other ones, while having a slightly better construction and flow rate, then I'm probably leaning towards recommending that one. But that's also where my bias is coming in. As I said in the beginning, I'm looking for a fast and a very consistent brewer, and I feel that's probably what I'm getting the most of here. Simplify and April are also good, but they are trying to do something slightly different with that 1 pour and 2 pour recipe. But I would also like to know if you've tried any of these dripper, what's your experience been? Let me know down in the comment section. Oh, by the way, if you want to see my original video where I complain about the stainless steel Kalita's flow rate and talk about how to fix that problem, then I'll put that video right here, and then you can just click it and then I'll see you over there.